No, it's time. Okay, you're live.
Hello, everyone. Let's see. Just gotta check. Okay, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Marvin intro and Q&A. And I assume most of you are here from the AppSumo deal. And yeah, we'll just kind of wait a little bit to kind of let people join, but I would love to know what app you're currently using. And so you can just type that in the chat. Mark will be on the chat. And yeah, so share what you're using. If you're using a task manager to-do app, currently maybe you don't have a digital app, maybe you use pen and paper or a planner. And also share if you feel like you're just sort of starting your productivity journey, you just sort of recently felt like I need to get organized, I'm trying to get some kind of system set up, or if this is something you've been doing for a long time, if you feel like you're an expert at it, or you've tried a lot of things but they haven't really worked. Hi, Frank, Buck. I remember you from the Productivity Summit. And hi, Michael. Hi, Tor, Tanya. Hi, Gina. Hi, Bruce, Warren, Martin, Stella, Sandra. Oh, we got quite a few people. Florida, Portugal, Canada. It's quite early, I guess, for a lot of people in the US, so good morning. We're actually here in Switzerland, so it's 4 p.m. Now we got Tick Tick, Remember the Milk, Todoist and Aura, Todoist and ClickUp. It's interesting, so yeah. Sometimes people use two things, I would assume. Some maybe more for personal things and one for team. Trello, ClickUp. Oh, Bushu. Oh, yeah, Bullet Journal. GTD, wow, done for decades. Taskade, yeah, that's a new one. That's interesting. Heard they have a lot of plans to build it out. Outlook and OneNote, GTD. Very cool. Todoist. ClickUp, yeah, ClickUp's really growing quite fast. Todoist. I would say Todoist is probably numbers, has the highest number of users for sort of a personal to-do list app. Okay, so now we lost Mark. So let's wait until he's back, because he's actually going to man the chat. Yeah, we'll just wait until he's back. So he'll be in the chat, and I have a couple of things that I thought is probably just useful overall to go through, but please, if you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat, and I'll try to stop sort of in between and check them, and at the end I think we should have time to just have open-ended questions. I guess another thing I'm curious about is like how many have already tried Marvin now, or like sort of gotten at least a little bit familiar with it or set up, or because I've talked to a lot of people in the support, and some people are like, whoa, they're like really in there already and like have everything set up, and it was quite an amazing. Oh yeah, it looks like we got some productivity geeks in there who just enjoy the productivity apps a lot. So, okay, I think we got Mark back. Mark is in the comments. And just to introduce ourselves, hello, I'm Christina, and this is my husband, Mark. And I think he has Marvin with him as well. So yeah, we're basically... What?
I almost fell.
Oh. So yeah, we're basically the creators behind Amazing Marvin. We're married, and Marvin just started out as something I built for myself a few years ago, but the more I researched, the space and procrastination, and I just realized that so many people are really struggling with procrastination and productivity challenges in general. And for myself, I built a lot of sort of extra features in, the first version of Marvin had like a diary and, so I could check my feelings and stuff like that. And I just thought that there's probably, more people out there that Marvin could be really helpful for, especially as I started to sort of see what other apps there are, because funnily enough, I've never actually used another to-do app before I built Marvin. I don't know how I made it through school, but I never had any system. I don't think I even wrote a to-do list on paper. But I had a business with my sister, and I just started to get so incredibly overwhelmed that I just thought I have to build something for myself. I could have, of course, just, looked up what already exists, but I like having side projects, and I think it gave me a way to procrastinate the work I actually had to do, because I liked working on Marvin more and programming. And the very basic version was just I wanted a way to see all of the things I had to do and be able to really organize them. Just so that I felt a bit like I had control and I saw what there is to do. But then I wanted a way to just have a list that I'm focusing on every day. So sort of like thinking about what I want to do that day. And that's very, very the core system, the very basic system. Obviously, Marvin has evolved quite a bit from that. But when you signed up, you probably saw that that's still the first setup that you see. You have this My Day list, and you have your master list. And that is just something to reduce overwhelm, because I just felt overwhelmed. And I didn't want to every day be reminded of the 1,000 things I had to do, because obviously I was not going to get through them in a day, probably not even a week or a month. And I just didn't want to look at them, but I also needed a way to obviously have them written down. I think that's usually what people think of first when they think about the value of a to-do list. You just need to have it out on paper so you don't have to remember it, which is a very, very important benefit, obviously, of having some kind of system. But if that was the only thing, we would all just be able to use paper, right? But digital apps have a bit of like an extra benefit in some ways because of the way that you can manipulate the data, and there's some automations. Because let's face it, I think most of us nowadays have extremely complicated lives, and there's so many demands on us from all kinds of areas of our lives. So yeah, that is just a little bit about Marvin's backstory, but let's get into it. So, as I said, the first sort of important thing to understand is this master list idea. And just as the name says, that's just, you want to have everything that is in action that you have to take to be in Marvin, so you don't have to remember it. And that's, the kind of the key. And the nice thing is that this master list, you just kind of like set it up once, right? And you add stuff as things come up. We're going to go over how to best set this up, sort of the different item types we have. But once that's in Marvin, there's now the challenge of, well, how do you actually work this off? Because that's kind of what we're ultimately trying to do with all this stuff, like get it done. Because, if you just need something to write it down, you can literally use any app or paper. But then where it gets interesting is this idea of a system, having some kind of system behind how you manage your work, right? And it's kind of like a set of rules in a way of, how do you prioritize? How do you pick what to do first? Do you even make a day plan? Do you schedule it in your calendar or just have a list? So there's just so many ways to kind of get the work done, ultimately manage the work. And that's sort of what we refer to as a workflow. It's just, the kind of steps you go through to manage your work and get them done. And I think that's where a lot of people who are maybe not successful with apps yet, or people who are new to it, kind of trip up. Because the thing is, there's so many different ways that you can set up a workflow, and different things work for different people. It's really dependent on your brain. Like, some people just have different preferences for more structure, less structure, more flexibility, but also the type of work you have. If there's a lot of stuff that comes up every day, if you have a lot of deadlines, like a student, for example, where almost everything has some kind of deadline, or maybe you're an entrepreneur and you just have a lot of stuff that you could do to improve your business, but there's nobody who's telling you what to do first. So all these things will require kind of a different setup that is likely going to be ideal for you. And so you need an app that can manage that and is flexible enough so that you can find your ideal setup. And even over the course, of your life, what you need is probably going to change. Like, sometimes we switch jobs or job responsibility changes. And so ideally we have just something where we don't have to switch, because if you've switched apps, and I'm sure many of you have, there's a big time cost associated with getting familiar with something new, porting it. Often there's not a good way to export and import data. And every kind of app might, you like this about this app, and this, they often have sort of a paradigm of how they kind of, not want you to work, but they are in some ways often limited. Like, there's specific GTD apps, and GTD is a great workflow, and if you know that that's what you're going to use for the rest of your life, and you're going to use it exactly the way that app implemented it, that's fine. But all these things usually aren't a given, and especially when you start out, you don't know yet if GTD will work.
Keep going.
Or, a day plan will work. So that's kind of like what Marvin has really evolved into. An app that you feel good with just sticking, because you know that this app can be adapted, it can grow with you, it can change with you. Okay, what are you doing?
So there are some black bars flashing, and I'm trying to change the OBS setup. Do you need it?
How do you change that?
Sorry about the technical difficulties. So I'm going to switch it to use the browser instead of the desktop app and see if that helps.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That's fine. So it's just black stuff flashing across the screen?
Yeah.
Oh my. Sorry, everyone. So yeah, that's kind of the basic idea. That you can just have your data, and basically an app that can be lots of different apps and grows and changes with you. Now the challenge, of course, here is how do we make it easy for you to get the setup that you want, and also, okay, the flashing seems to be better.
Really?
Fine here. I think a lot of people also didn't see it to begin with.
I don't think I'm going to be able to fix this now. I'm sorry, guys.
Why?
I don't know what's causing it. We could try switching to this, but looks good, no problem. Black bar is gone. It's no big deal. Okay.
Okay. So I should continue here?
Yeah, just continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So so that's kind of the basic idea, and there's, in a lot of ways it's quite a difficult thing for the user, I think, but also of course for us, because they always say don't try to be everything for everyone. But that's kind of what we're basically doing, right? But so far so good. It has worked out well for us. I think a lot of people have found a kind of a home with us, especially people. I get so many emails from people saying, I've tried everything, I've tried this and this and this and this and this, and I feel like I can just stay and have arrived. So that's pretty cool. But so I guess we're going to talk about now how to get the data into Marvin first, and sort of how the setup is, because it's kind of usually the first thing you want to do, because Marvin can't help you, and you can't really explore it as well, all the different setups, if you don't have some data to work with. So let's go in here into the master list, and by default there's just the inbox, and that's always there. It's just whenever you just add something and you don't say this belongs to any kind of category, it just goes there. And then you have categories. You can see this folder icon, and when you go inside a folder, you can also see that now inside the folder, you can add more folders. So subfolders, projects, and tasks. So those are kind of like the 3 types we have to work with here. And if you're coming from other apps, there's a variety of ways that apps do that. Some don't have areas, some don't have projects. A lot of them have lists. Some let you group the lists and things. And so when you import your data, and we have a lot of different importers, you kind of want to probably get familiar with this, data paradigm we have. So you can kind of know how to rearrange it, because usually you do need to do a little bit of arrangement. And the main category is what you probably want to think about first, and that's kind of like the areas of your life. So GTD, areas of your life. You're just thinking about what are some clearly separable areas where work accumulates. So I have a lot of examples here. So health, school, but of course it depends. If you have these items, and for work, some people like to just have a work folder, but if you use Marvin mainly just for work, you might as well just break it down into the subcategories. So maybe there's admin tasks or different clients you have. But yeah, it's just sort of your top level area of your life. And for very large areas, for example, Marvin, that's kind of where most of my tasks come from. You can use categories. And by the way, this is infinitely nestable. So you can just, use as much nesting as you need to really feel organized and feel like things have their home. So I have products, so features. But then when I go inside, it starts to get into actual projects. So projects versus categories. Categories are really more kind of permanent things, where work just keeps accumulating. And projects are things that I do hope in the near future to sort of say, this is done now, and then I can check them off. And this is also very GTD, anybody who's familiar with getting things done. Everything that has sort of more than one action step should be a project. We do try to encourage users to really think of a task, so anything that's a checkbox, to make that small enough that it's sort of a single action step that you can sit down, look at it, and get it done, and without taking tons of breaks or moving it from one day to the next. So for most people, that's about an hour. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good kind of guideline for best practices. And also, if you start with procrastination, there's a couple of things you can do in the way that you write a task to make it more likely you do it. So it should start with a verb, so that you know what the actual action is that you have to take. So for example, a bad task would be just website or website design. Like it doesn't really make you want to do something. And the more specific the verb, the better as well, because you don't want there to be a lot of ambiguity about what actually this project is, this task is about. So yeah, you can just kind of lay this out with the stuff that you already have, and if you have this in another app, you can import it. The importer is here under account. And if we don't have your app, you can reach out, and I'm actually already working on Asana. A lot of people wanted to import from Asana and Trello. But yeah, you can also start fresh. Sometimes it's an opportunity to kind of start fresh. Are there any questions about the setup? I guess some people...
Lots of questions.
Okay. Go ahead. So I guess...
Okay, so here's a question. How do you do the startup process how the setup process from start to finish? So what are the steps for getting set up?
Yeah, so I guess it depends if you already have your tasks or not, somewhere in another app. I would say import your stuff first if you have it, and if you don't, I do think it's helpful to do the main categories first, even if you don't have anything written down anymore and you want to do a brain dump. So you just click here at the bottom. This is always how you sort of add things to a list. There's usually buttons at the bottom that look like this. And then you just, figure out what is an area of your life. And the thing is, don't overthink this. Don't think this has to be perfect. It's actually very easy to switch and move it around, and that's kind of expected. So I would make this, just think about the areas first, and then as a brain dump, you try to think about the items in each area. You can also just start with a task, because it's actually quite easy. when you say one task and you click enter, it immediately goes to the next. So you can do it quite quickly. Just kind of a brain dump. And there's also a trigger list, so I have a link to that in the help in the knowledge base. A trigger list is basically a list of all the different ways that usually people get tasks, and kind of to try to trigger your mind about, oh yeah, this is something I actually have to do in my life. So we'll just go through all there's health. Do you have any appointments you have to make? Do you have anything to take care of in terms of that? And it just sort of goes through all the areas so that you can think about, oh yeah, I have something there that I actually have to do. So yeah, then I would just probably create the task and another task and another task, just kind of like dump it out there. And then you can go through it again and think about, is this a task or a project? How long will this take me? Will this take me multiple days, multiple weeks? Is it a single action step? And then you can just click this edit icon here and turn this into a project with the flag. So the flag is the default project icon. And then it's a project. And then you can click on it if you want to add items to it. So that's kind of how this nesting works. Like if you're familiar with the Mac operating system, it has also this sort of column view. There's a list view if that's something you're more comfortable with. It's like this. And then you can just add projects inside here and here. But yeah, personally I prefer the column view. So yeah, you just kind of dump everything there, and you want to apply certain data that is just very specific to that item already now. So if there's something that has an actual deadline, you want to also add that deadline, because that's kind of part of that task, important information you likely want to know about. And this gets us into one thing that trips up, I would say, most people in Marvin. And that's the difference between a schedule date and a due date. The reason why this trips up so many people, I think partially is because a lot of to-do apps only have one type of date, or in my opinion, they use this word due date and not in the sense that it's actually defined. So a due date by definition is a deadline. It has to be done by a certain date. But then the way that the interface is implemented often, it's placing it in that day and sort of suggesting that it's something you have to do on that day. But obviously most people don't want to do things last minute, or even on the day something's due, because it should already be done by then. And that's something that kind of always, I find it creates a lot of confusion because of the terminology used in other apps. And then other apps also sometimes use start dates when they actually mean schedule dates, or they have some kind of mix of that. So there's a Help Center article about the 4 dates, because we actually have 4 different dates. 2 are optional, and 2 are always there by default. And so there's 4 different dates, and you kind of want to make sure that you understand how they're used in Marvin. And so yeah, due date is a deadline, and that's how you add a due date. You click on this edit icon, and then here you can pick the deadline. And this will show underneath the project or the task, because it's just something that you need to know about when you're looking at that task, right? And then this calendar is how you schedule it to a day. And so this is the schedule date, or the due date, but DO date. So I'm not going to say that word because it sounds the same as the deadline due date. But yeah, so it's an idea of scheduling something to your calendar, and I think that's something that's becoming more and more popular in the productivity world. Like people say, to-do lists don't work, you have to schedule your tasks. It's partially right, that for a lot of people it's helpful to have a sort of an idea of when to do something and plan, maybe your day ahead of time. But again, GTD doesn't work like that, for example. There's lots of other workflows that don't. So, it's not a requirement. But there's definitely some tasks that you want to do on a very specific date, like call your mom, for example, like on her birthday. You need to do that on that day. And to me, that's not really a deadline. It's literally just you want to schedule that into the calendar for that day. But instead of, the difference between actually using a calendar is that you don't maybe have a specific time. You don't need to do it at a specific time like an appointment. It's just you need to do it that day. So it goes into the to-do list for that day. And this is what this date is about with the calendar. It's kind of how you can remember this. So yeah, and this is another thing. If you import from Todoist, for example, I really struggled to decide if I'm going to use that date as a due date or a due date in Marvin when we convert it. So I asked a lot of people, how do you use the date in Todoist? Is this to you a deadline or a scheduled date, like I do it on the day? And I got about like, I think 70-30 maybe split, and 70% of people actually use it as this date. And that's, I think when I look at the Todoist interface, is how it's in some ways more meant to be. But yeah, so we import that right now as a schedule date. So just be aware of that. If you have to maybe go through your data and think about adding the actual deadlines to it, and removing it from the calendar perhaps, if you actually want to just use it as a deadline. So that's kind of important part of the setup as well. But beyond that, somebody just called Marvin an awful brown square. Ouch! That's Marvin, by the way, in the corner. He's kind of our mascot. And yeah, I can tell you later the story of why it's called Amazing Marvin and why he's our mascot, even though he's kind of only helping you get started, but then he's just sort of not very present yet. But yeah, another thing that a lot of people want to know is how to change the color, and you just basically click the folder, and then you can pick a color. And you can choose sort of different color presets in the settings, just if you want to have sort of a coherent color theme that actually sort of matches. You can also pick an icon. There's also a lot of confusion about where this goes, but it's basically turns the flag into that icon. There's a few other places where it gets used, but it's really not that important. It's just some people like to have their tasks, as an icon that kind of matches this category. So yeah, but I think this is it about the setup. You can, as you can see, you can drag things. I hope you can see actually what I'm dragging, because sometimes it doesn't record that. But you can drag things around, you can rearrange stuff, you can turn, projects into categories and categories into projects. So you just kind of want to get this set up, but yeah, don't stress too much. And if you have feel like a problem where you can't decide how to do something, reach out. I have received a couple of questions per email, and I'll try to get to them in the end. So any urgent setup questions?
So, question, what is the difference between a project, a task, and a folder?
Okay, so there's a help article on this if you want to read about it more, but basically folders are kind of static things. They're like areas that stay around. Like, for example, household, likely there will always be tasks coming into the household area of your life, right? And with Marvin, there will always be stuff to do on the product and stuff to do on the marketing, but it's not something I'm looking to complete. It's not like a finite project. And this project is literally how you'd use the word project in real life. Like, oh, I have a home improvement project, or I have a marketing project, and it's sort of finite. It has an end date or a hard deadline, and something you do, and then at some point it's done and you check it off. And there's a little bit of a gray zone where some of these things, like let's say you're kind of creating a new app or something, and it's just a really, really long project, maybe over multiple years, you can also make that a category, even though if at some point technically it might be finished and you're done with it. But yeah, sort of more permanent things, I would set up as a category. Literally think of it as like a filing system for your projects and tasks. And the difference between a project and a task is largely in size. You just want to keep tasks as single actions. So that's kind of the difference, because a lot of people just say, it's a task I have to do. But this is where sort of the psychology comes in, where we try to enforce good habits that ultimately will help you have an easier time getting stuff done. Because there's nothing worse than having a ginormous task and you just don't want to get started on it because it's just not clear what actually the first step is. It's not really a step. Like designing a website is not a step. There's a lot of steps you have to take to design a website. So that shouldn't be a task. That's exactly one of these scenarios where you're thinking about how long is this going to take me? Is it going to involve different types of actions that are spread over days? Then it should definitely be a project. So you just turn it into a project. But other than that, they have quite similar properties. I mean, you can add labels to them. They have notes. You can schedule them. They have deadlines. They can have their own deadlines. It's literally just sort of a difference of scope and size. And we do recommend to keep this, again, something you can sit down, read, do, and then take a break, and then it's done. So 5 minutes to an hour is usually sort of how long tasks take. There are subtasks, but those aren't real tasks, so you cannot have individual deadlines or schedule them to individual days, because task is always sort of the small unit, and subtask is more maybe a checklist for a specific task, if that helps, or just to break down things down even further, because that's a very, very popular just technique in productivity. If you're struggling with something, try breaking it down into smaller steps and just do one step at a time. And yeah, sometimes it seems really silly, but it's actually really helpful. So to do that sometimes if you feel you're stuck. So that's always something to think about. Like, is this maybe just too large? Let's try to break it down. And then sometimes you also realize if you can't break it down, you don't actually know how to do this yet. And that's maybe why you're procrastinating on it. Because it's just something maybe you haven't done before, or you don't have clarity about how actually to go about it. So then okay, the next step for me should be to figure out actually how to do this. Maybe I can ask somebody or research, and then you just create that task. You don't have to always know everything ahead of time. There's a webinar I did last year on projects, and that kind of goes a lot about how to work well with projects in general, but also with Marvin. Is that it for the setup? Okay. Should I move on?
Next question.
Oh, I guess I forgot something.
So how do I define next actions?
In terms of knowing what they are? Or maybe in GTD, I guess, because you want to just mark a few things as next action. So everybody's not familiar with GTD. It's one core principle of it is that you kind of have this list of just next actions that are open for you to take. And I think, some projects have to be done in order. So you have to do this task before this task before this task. So then the next action would only be the first one, because you can't basically do this yet. Some you can just do any of them. So technically all of them would be next actions. And the way that you can do this in Marvin is, we'll get to this later in the smart list, but there's a filter where you can automatically say, is it the first in a project, or just within an area? Or you could also do this with labels, where you maybe have a next action label and you just always sort of apply that to all the things that are open. We are going to introduce very soon that you can actually set if something is a sequential or parallel project. So if it has to be done in order or not. We do already have dependencies, so you can very fine-tunedly say this can't be done before this can be done. But I think for projects, sometimes it's just too tedious. It's more like projects to projects. But we'll get to that later. But yeah, there's different options. I guess the other thing that you probably want to do in your setup is actually setting up recurring tasks. So recurring tasks are things that you do on a regular schedule. Maybe paying bills every month, cleaning your bathrooms every week, changing the sheets every week, stuff like that. And if you want to manage these kinds of things in Marvin, which I think a lot of people do, recurring tasks are really ideal for that. And you just can turn a project or a task into a recurring item by clicking edit and then clicking this arrow. So this means sort of repeating. And then you have to set up the repeating schedule, so it's daily, weekly, X times per week, so only on the weekdays or the weekends, or every 5 days. But there's a lot of options here. And if there's something you want to do but you can't figure out with how to set this up, let us know. But I think it should cover most of it. And those tasks will automatically, let's say I have a daily task, Marvin will create them and always put them in my days, sort of ahead of time already. So as you can see, if I go through my days here with my arrow keys, I go forward to Friday, I can see, this recurring tasks here, Marvin has created and already scheduled for me. And if you're wondering how to get this symbol, there are some global settings here in the top right. So there's a lot of little, things you can tweak, and just don't worry about it if it overwhelms you if you're new. I think a great way is just to kind of get into it, and then when you notice, you know what, it would be nice if it actually showed this here. Usually we have an option for that, and you can just ask the community or search the help center, hey, is there an option for this? But in this case, it's tasks and projects where you can say, I want to indicate when it's a recurring task. So you just turn this on, and then items that are actually created by Marvin and scheduled will have this, and then you can click it and update sort of the parent task. And there's a lot of confusion sometimes with how recurring task works. Definitely something where you just have to understand how Marvin does this, and the Help Center article, I think, should answer most questions. One thing that's strange right now is that projects work a bit differently, like they actually get created on that date. We are going to streamline this so you have both options for both item types. There's kind of an artifact because here's the thing, Marvin is a work in progress. It's not set in stone. We have a very frequent release schedule. We release multiple times a month because we really incorporate the feedback from people and wishes from people into the app. And so that means Marvin evolves. We never try to take away any features. Sometimes things slightly change, but not in a way that ultimately affects your workflow. But it might cause some confusion about the interface sometimes. This can happen. But yeah, the good thing is Marvin is a work in progress. And if you have something that is bothering you about Marvin, or you wish there was something it could do, don't give up on it. Just let us know, because we love this kind of feedback, because I think that's what ultimately makes Marvin good and has allowed us to make Marvin good, because we just really listen and we try to make it possible for everybody to have a system that they really like and feel comfortable using every day. So again, that's bad business practice. Try to make everybody happy, but that's just how we work, and I think that's part of why Marvin is really loved by its users. And so yeah, just reach out. And I guess we can now talk about the customization, because that's kind of where this whole workflow thing comes in, right? Like you have all of the things set up. Now, how do you find a workflow and how do you set up? Because maybe you already have a workflow. Like if you say you've been using GTD, for so long, you just want to set up the GTD workflow. And so here on the top right, we have the strategies, and those could also just be called features, because that's basically a lot of the feature Marvin has, and most of them are turned off by default because we just think start out simple and use what you need, but the rest shouldn't bother you. And so those are all kind of like optional features that you can toggle on and off with this switch, and they're kind of grouped. So you might want to start with the basics and then prioritization, and there's a little question mark here that kind of tries to tell you a little bit more about these types of features. You can always click them and read more about them. I try to have a video for all of them, but I'm not quite caught up. And you can also go to the Help Center. And then some of them have settings, so that when you're using a feature and there's something you want to change about it, or you want to sort of check out the options that we have here. And you can also see from the outside if they have settings and go straight there. So this is a very basic one, for example. It adds a context to your task. So a lot of people, when you actually adhere to the best practices and you make single steps, some of the steps only make sense in the context of the project. If it says, brainstorm ideas or something, then you need to know, okay, what project does this relate to? So you can turn on the category context, and underneath it, or, if you have your tags on the right side of it, it will tell you what project this belongs to. So I turned this on. Let's make it kind of colorful and have a text underneath. I can now sort of clearly see, oh, this is for the new website. You can also hover over this and it will tell you. So yeah, that's a lot of where the ultimate customization comes from these strategies. And I'm going to go over some of the key ones in a bit. But that's kind of the basic strategy system. And yeah, I hope that makes sense. A lot of people feel excited by this, and a lot of people feel overwhelmed by this. This is sort of like our eternal challenge on how to manage this, because we were trying to reduce overwhelm, and we don't want Marvin to overwhelm you. But here is always what I have to say. Like, I think there's some people who, and I can relate to this, want to understand the entirety of an app before they feel like they can start using it, right? And with Marvin, that's not going to happen. there's just too much. And if you try to understand every little feature, you're never going to really get into it. So my recommendation here is always just start simple. You can not turn any of them on and just start with the basic workflow. By default, it's a day planning workflow, by the way. So you go over, this date, your master list pops up, you can open them and you can drag things into your day to make a day plan. And then the next day, you just sort of work it from the top. That's a very, very basic workflow that you can get started with immediately as soon as you have your tasks, just the night before. Ideally, some people do it first thing in the morning. Plan your day and get it done. When you do this very quickly, you might find you're already running into issues, like maybe exactly what I've described before. You realize, wait, I don't even know what this action step is about. And then you can go to the strategies, or you can ask the community, how do I solve this? Or, you want to add a note to a task, turn on the notes. Well, that's kind of how you go about it. And with time, you might notice bigger problems like, wow, I never actually get through my list. There's always, stuff left over today. Why am I making these plans? Or why am I so unproductive? So, and then you kind of can investigate more. And I'm actually working on a lot of resources to help with that process of finding a workflow, right? Because it's always the same. It's you try something and you have to reflect on what's working and what's not. Then think about why might it not be working and what can I change to fix it? What can I adjust to alleviate that pain point? And that's a process that can take quite a bit of time. And I think it's in some ways never really done. There's a book written by Charles Duhigg, and it was a really famous productivity author. And he says he encourages people to experiment with their setup, try different things, because that's how you gain awareness. And that's really key in productivity, to know yourself, know what issues you run into, because most productivity problems have to do with human problems, feeling overwhelmed, not being able to make decisions, having too high standards, procrastination. What's procrastination? Not being able to force ourselves to get through and do something that feels uncomfortable, like not being able to get past this resistance we feel to tasks that make us uncomfortable in a variety of ways. They may be boring, they're hard, and they have uncertainty, we're afraid of it, So yeah, it's an exciting process, and it's something that just takes time, and don't feel that you have to know the perfect system and agonize over how to get started. Just get started with a basic day planning workflow, or something has already worked for you. And so this takes us to the next step, because if you feel overwhelmed with this and you don't enjoy building a workflow, you don't enjoy tinkering, making all the lists that you want to see. Some people love it, and then you'll be very happy here. But if you don't, and you just want to focus on the work and have someone give you an idea of what to do, this is something we launched very recently. It's called the Workflow Library. So it's basically a library of workflows that you can just turn on with one click. And we have a couple of app mimics. This is also if you're coming from, let's say, Todoist or Nirvana HQ, and you like how they work and they work well for you, you're familiar with them, you can just start with that and click it, and it will actually set up your Marvin to mimic that app. And that's a good starting point. It makes you feel more comfortable, it's familiar, and maybe you have an app and you just wish there was one thing that was different, or a feature you could add to it. So if you like Todoist, but you just wish they had 2 dates, for example, you wish you could add a calendar integration or have an estimate for how long a task takes. Then start with the Todoist setup and go customize from there. So that's the difference between the workflows and the strategies. The workflows literally just use different settings here. So as you can see now, I've turned on the setup, the Todoist setup, and it turned on a bunch of features for me, the features that Todoist has, and in the way that Todoist has them. So in the settings, these are the 3 colors that Todoist uses for the priorities. And so we try to kind of mimic it as closely as possible. Of course, it's not 100% possible to mimic it. But yeah, that's how the workflows work. And then there's also snippets, which are more simple little things that you might just not want to set up, but you find helpful. So for example, you can have a smart list, and we're going to get to what that means, where you just show all of your items, or a screen where it shows you all of the items that you've had in your system for a really long time. So those are just, you can turn on multiple of those and just kind of add them to your workflow and toggle them off. So now this added this tab here where I could see anything that I've added more than 3 months ago, or more than 6 months ago, and so forth. So does that make sense so far? Are there questions about the strategies in the workflow sort of in general?
Strategies in general.
You don't have to find the question if there wasn't one.
No.
Okay, good.
Okay, so here's a question, an interesting question for
Yeah.
you. About task planning and working with the calendar. So
Yeah.
I think showing the task planning is something that they're interested in. Like, how do you go from month planning to week planning to day scheduling?
Yeah.
And then what's the difference between that and the task calendar?
Okay, so yeah, let's jump into some of the advanced features. So the people have asked questions. So obviously, when you manage your task, you're also managing your time. That's why there's a lot of calendar features as well. And this is where we get into the timing of what do the certain dates mean and what does it mean if something's in the calendar. And I've just turned on all the calendar stuff. So this one just allows you to sort of have this calendar view. Calendar sync, if you want to import items from a calendar. This is just an event type that usually gets automatically turned off when you do this, and all the items just like you know in a calendar. And then there's this one, I would say this is an advanced strategy. It's called planning ahead. And that I think causes some confusion. So I'm going to talk about this. So go to the planning overlay. This is basically this. And again, this is a very, very specific strategy designed for a specific problem that people run into. So you don't have to use this. And I think if it, is confusing, this is definitely a more advanced thing that maybe you should leave for later. But the idea is basically this. Let's say, you're a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, and you just have a ton of projects and you could do them anytime. So this is kind of why I created this, because I actually needed this for myself. Because obviously there's, 50 features that I want to add to Marvin, but I have to figure out when I do what. I can't just have them all in, the master list. But there's also no deadline to them because I don't have external deadlines. But I still wanted a way to categorize them somehow by time. Now, if you have items that have a lot of deadlines, you probably don't need this, because you can automatically create lists and saying, show me everything that has a deadline in the next 30 days, right? You just need that one deadline date. But this is more for people that have a lot of flexibility in when they do things. You want to maybe plan it in some ways, but I always say you shouldn't make specific plans very far in the future. So a day plan is not something you want to plan every week, for every day of the week. You want to already have an exact list of what you're going to do, because that's too specific, because things change, unpredictable things happen. You never know what's going to happen. So you want to just ideally only make a day plan the night before. And then the next day you have to already think about, okay, what happened? Did I actually finish these things? Did something more important come up? Otherwise, you're constantly changing your plans, right? If you plan too specific, too far in the future. But there's sort of then, you have this opposite problem like I just described if you don't have any planning. So this strategy called planning ahead gives you sort of a middle ground. Because what you can do here is make a list, not per day, but per month and per week. So you're just saying, I just need to get this stuff done in that week, or I want to get that stuff done that week or that month. But, it's not set in stone, and it's not specific to when, on which day or which week, if you just want to make the month plan. And yeah, that's sort of, there's not a good word for it. I think we just sort of say make a week plan, a month plan. It's just a list for that month and that week. And you can drag projects and tasks into it to kind of say, that's when I want to do it. And one common workflow here you can choose if you want to. Maybe some people, they just want to think about the week, and so then you just switch to the week. You can do this up here with V, and just make a week plan, and then you can actually work straight from this, because let me just talk about Smart List, because that's probably, if you want to do any kind of customization, this is likely a strategy you'll use. And it just allows you to define a specific type of list. So you can say, I want to have a list of everything that has the word call in it, if you want to do all the calls together, for example, or everything that's coming up, or everything has a priority of 1 or 3. You can be very specific and make very complicated queries. And again, it doesn't affect, the items in your master list, just an additional way to look at it through a specific lens. So kind of like a filtered list. Most people who have used other to-do apps are familiar with this. Sometimes it's called filters, sometimes it's called Smart List, or smart filters. And then you can, create a list of everything you've planned this week, and actually this looks like this, and then you can just directly work off of that week list. We have this set up as a workflow. So here, if you turn on the week list, it will kind of do this for you, and then you have your list also here. Because the planning overlay is maybe just where you want to plan, so that you can kind of see all of the week buckets and all the months, but you can also hover here and see how many tasks you've planned. But then you want to probably work it off, in the main view. This is sort of the main view that you always come back to. A lot of things open sort of as these full screen overlays, just so you can focus on that. And then, you exit out of it. I think that's sometimes a bit confusing as well, because it's a bit unique in how we do this. And then you just kind of always try to work from here, basically. The planning really, what it does is you give it an artificial start and end date. And those are these, but it doesn't, I think, apply a start date in the Marvin sense, because start date is a Marvin feature, and I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. But it does give it sort of an end date. So if you did because an end date is just an artificial deadline, basically. It's something you intend to do by a certain date. So all this stuff in here, I intend to have finished by the end of October. So they kind of have an automatic end date, but it's not explicitly written down here. But if you make a smart list, so I think that's something where we have to improve a lot. Like, where does it say these things explicitly? And you can always reach out, and we're happy to help with these things. And as you can see, we have these tabs, and this is sort of what we call the scheduling sidebar, and it just pops up the lists you have created and the master list. And then on the right, there's usually an interface where you can drag it into it. And that's kind of the idea. You always drag from the left sidebar into whatever's on the right. And most screens have this, when you can just press X or this master list scroll here. And you can also, so if I've planned my months, because it's always good to go from sort of more broad to more specific. So I know I can maybe do 5 projects for Marvin in a month, or 3. And so then I would just sort of think about, okay, from all my projects here, or maybe I have made a smart list with all my projects. And then you can actually change and customize these tabs as well. So that's something that I think is really helpful. So you have sort of, you're trying to get these things through a funnel. You're trying to figure out what are all the open projects, right? If you have a lot of stuff to do, then okay, what are actually only the really important ones? Let's prioritize them. From these important ones, when do I do them? And so that's kind of like a workflow you go through. Let's say I had a tab here with all my projects from Marvin, and then I drag them in here, and then I want to be maybe a bit more specific and actually plan my weeks, and then I can get to the months here at the tab. This tab appeared this month. I can be more specific and drag it into specific weeks. And then if I do have a day plan, and I don't want to just work from the week list directly, now here you also have this week and this month. So when you plan your day, and again you do this kind of one day at a time, you obviously pick now mostly from this week list, because that's sort of the funnel you move them through. You're just creating smaller and smaller subsets, so that it's easier in the decision-making process. Because if you have to always pick from, so you have thousands of tasks in here, that's just analysis paralysis. So that's one way, and that's kind of why this strategy is helpful. So and then the calendar, again, in some ways this is a bit of a calendar already. Like if you have a day list, it's just not specific in terms of time. So putting stuff on the calendar would just add one more specificity point of saying exactly when to do it. And yeah, I mean, most people like to separate that they have appointments for that, but then they just have a daily list. But some people do like to make a very, very specific plan of kind of scheduling things into the calendar. And if that's you, you want to look at the agenda. And the agenda just allows you to turn this list basically into sort of this timeline. And it will be the same in your calendar, because you can, drag items directly into your calendar here. Just find some tasks and schedule them for a specific time and expand them. But then, yeah, usually most people don't want to actually work stuff off in the calendar, because you could go just here and see the week view. But we just kind of built this in here, so you can just toggle it. And you see that right now there's nothing on the calendar, because while I have a list, I haven't given it a specific time. So if you want to do that, you just can. Okay, now there's something not working. Yeah, normally you would see your scheduled tasks there. Sorry about this bug. We just had a new release because we're trying to get the workflow library out, and it did break some stuff. But if you see something like that, just write us and we'll fix it. And usually within a few days, we'll have a fix. If it's something really bad, we have a fix out that day. So that's kind of goes with the territory of having an app that, is constantly being improved and featured. Things do break. But yeah, normally you'd have your to-do list there for the day, and then you can be more specific. Another way is you can just add a time to a task in the title. So I just, go in here in edit mode and say, I'm going to do this at 8 a.m. And now when I switch to this, it will be at 8 a.m. In terms of duration, there's one strategy, I would say it's one of the most popular strategies, called duration estimates. It allows you to estimate how long something will take, because that's one of the key reasons why people don't finish their to-do lists for the day. They just plan way too much, and you realize that once you start adding, estimations for these tasks. This takes me 20 minutes. This takes me an hour. It adds up really fast. And here at the top, you can see the total. And the other question is, okay, what's actually reasonable to get done? And there's a blog post I wrote on the Marvin blog about how many hours a day can a human actually get work done. It's quite long. I pulled a lot of different research and surveys and stuff like that. Then you obviously want to kind of try to stick with what you found is your sweet zone. And this actually, because this is about 20 minutes, this will also then be used as the duration here in the calendar. But yeah, so because you really want to keep events and tasks kind of separate, because they are different things, right? When you schedule a task into the calendar or the agenda, it means you just want to be very specific about when you do this. This is a workflow that works well for some people and is a disaster for other people. So don't, when you read somebody, a lot of people like to say, this is the best, the only thing you have to do this. Like, it's all BS. Like, there's no one rule, for these things. So yeah, just listen to yourself and what feels good, what you enjoy, what gives you a sense of accomplishment, what makes you motivated, what doesn't make you feel overwhelmed. That's always a good measure. You should always just listen to what's sort of fun to do and feels good. Yeah, so I guess I already showed this calendar. There is a full calendar. One other thing you might want to do with this calendar is have an overview and a month view for due date. So here you can show me the deadlines. So then you can see the deadlines. They have a little fire. Fire always means something's gonna burn if you don't take care of it by then. Or you maybe just want to see events. So this is the event type, dentist appointments, meetings. Where you can see which tasks you have scheduled for the day. They have a checklist, all day items, just like in the calendar, something that kind of goes all day, holidays, stuff like that. And one other thing is the time blocking feature. Again, that's quite an advanced strategy, but it is for sure one of the most popular ones. But there's a confusion here, because time blocking, that word is used sometimes to mean putting tasks on a calendar, like literally, brush your teeth and put that on a calendar. And in some ways, I guess it is blocking out your calendar, but time blocks in Marvin are different. So you want to watch maybe the video, and we just think of it as mapping out your week in terms of when you focus on what kind of areas of your life. To give you an example, I really like to do this because, and I think this is a good strategy for a lot of entrepreneurs or solopreneurs or people who just have different areas in their workspace. And you could work on marketing, you can work on product, and often it's helpful to kind of define, what, I'm going to do admin tasks on Monday evening or Monday afternoon. That's my admin time block. That's where I focus on admin work. And marketing I do here and here and here. And it's not a specific task or even a project. It's more like an area. So often they map directly to a category. So I might have, say, 8 to 9 I dedicate to my health. That's when I take care of health tasks. Or it also can map to maybe a smart list. Like if you do have a smart list, maybe where you're categorizing items by how much energy they take, for example. So you add, this is a high energy task, I need to be really focused to do this. It's low energy task, I can do this even if I'm about to fall asleep. You might want to just have zones of like, here's my high energy work or my high focus work. Here's my low energy time block where I can do this. And these are usually things that, you might also want to do again week over week and sort of have a routine in your week where you have defined areas of where you tackle certain things. That's basically what time blocking is in Marvin. So if you say I want to add a time block, you could say here I want to focus on the product in Marvin, and it maps it to that category, takes the color, and you can save these templates for that week and then load them. We definitely want to add a lot more feature with time blocking. And then in your day, let's actually make one for today. And where are we? So here you can see a little line where we are. I'll just move this down so you can see this. Then just like, how is this going to help me actually when I just do this? Well, for one, you can see this breakdown. And that's actually just kind of a helpful thing to sometimes figure out how much time they actually have available, because some people have a lot of pre-commitments. So you might have, when you sync your calendars to it, meeting here, here I have to pick up my children, here I have to do this. But you also know the areas of your life where you need to work on your task list, because those are areas in your Marvin, right? So you can just say, here I got a slot for 2 hours where I can do focus time. And I do recommend to make time blocks not too short, because you don't want to have every hour something else. It's too much context switching. It's better to keep them kind of broad, and like some people like even to have a whole day dedicated to one area. Some people like to have 2 large chunks, like morning I do focus on this, afternoon I focus on this, and then maybe a morning and an evening thing for some more personal stuff. But don't make them too small. But then you can sort of find the slots, that are in between your meetings and commitments. And you can see how much total time you actually have available. And this helps you, for example, with the week or the monthly planning, where you see, per week, I can only do 6 hours for marketing. So I got to be really clear on what are my top priorities. And this is just an exercise you can also just do on its own and not use it, later on. But it's just a good exercise sometimes to do this. Figure out how much time we actually have. Because again, overscheduling, committing to too much, having too high expectations of ourselves is such a common problem that just creates frustration and the feeling of we're unproductive when we're actually sometimes quite productive. I found that people who find themselves and who would label themselves as being extremely unproductive often are actually quite productive, but they just have huge expectations. So this gap is what decides how unproductive often you feel from your expectations and what you actually get done. So Marvin can help you manage your expectations and be more realistic about how much time you have, what you can get done, which will help with prioritization, because sometimes there's nothing more that makes you, be able to be more productive when you realize how limited your time is and how much stuff there's that you want to do. And then it can really light sort of a fire in the belly sometimes. Here you can see what time block we're in right now. That's one thing. It would always sort of tell you. And there's a bunch of different fun things you can do with this, but obviously I don't have time to go over everything. But you could even make a smart list that always shows you the top priorities for that time block. So you don't even have to plan a day or anything. Just set up your time blocks and go to that smart list, and you just always see what the top priorities are that you want to work on, or your next steps for that time block you're in right now. And then what automatically goes to the next time block, it will switch and adjust because it's a smart list, right? So we have a lot of smart list filters like that, and you can do really cool stuff with it if you're into that sort of stuff. We also have a feature where Marvin just kind of suggests a task based on, you know, the data you've inputted, how urgent is something, how important is something. So you can turn this on. Let's have the light bulb. And then you click it and Marvin will suggest a task for you to do. And this will also take into consideration the time block, because you can see right now it told me to do this task, which is in the household category, because I'm in the household time block. If you don't have time blocks, it will just pick from all the open items. But if you have a time block, it uses that. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with time blocks, or you can section your day into time blocks. So we have these section strategies where you can group items in lists. And this is a bit confusing because it used to work, you just turn it on and then they're sectioned. But now you can just easily group a list very quickly here with the top right and just change the grouping, no grouping, time block section grouping, you know, organize them by their category, by the main category or due date and so forth. The time block sections, you can see here now I got the time blocks from 9 to 10:30, 12 to 2. So this will, for example, help you plan your day. So if you use the time blocking to map out your stuff, and then you know you want to plan your day, and then you can see your time blocks and just kind of see, okay, I have 1.5 hours available here. Let's go and find what to do. And again, here you probably want to think about what tabs you want to have here, and you could have, you know, organize them by size. So everything that's 1 hour or more gets its large tab, and then small size, so that you can really nicely plan your day more easily and not just having to dig through the master list. So that's really, I think, an important point. Yeah, so I'm just talking a lot about all this stuff. I guess one other key feature, so the smart list is definitely, I would say, a key feature if you want to figure out your setup. But again, if all this sounds horrifying and you're just like, oh my God, I don't want to set anything up, go here, go explore. We have really cool workflows, you know, ready to go. And we're always adding more. And if you have a specific scenario, I mean, I love it if you reach out and you just explain, okay, here's my situation. I have this commitment, this commitment, this commitment. I often struggle with this. I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to plan. I often just have too many things to do. And that I can, you know, make a workflow specifically for that. Because the thing is, I know my own work situation the best. I know exactly the kinds of trouble I run into. But I don't probably know what a teacher goes through, the common, you know, things a teacher faces, or somebody who works in a specific role in a company. But I love to learn about these things, and it gives me ideas for features that I can add to help those people and help with your specific problems. And there's a column on our blog where you can write in, at your Marvin column, where you can, you know, talk about your productivity issue or ask for workflow advice. And the more specific, you know, the better. But even if you know, just want to share one problem, that's fine. And I'm going to add more and more workflows here as time goes on. I have already a bunch of things I just didn't get to, and I wanted just to launch this for you guys, the Sumo links, because I thought it would make a difference. But yeah, you can also share workflows with each other. Like if you ever see, you know, if you have a blog or something and you're into productivity, you can build workflows and put them on your blog for people to just download, and they can upload it here and try your setup. So that's a really cool thing. And I think as we grow, there will probably be more demand for this. Or if you just see somebody has a really cool workflow, they can just save it for you and you can use it too. So that's kind of like this idea behind this workflow library.
You looking for questions?
Yeah, okay, to mimic Marvin as other apps. So that's the workflow library. That's up here in the menu.
No. To mimic Marvin as other apps.
Oh. Wait, what does that mean?
I thought she meant with...
No, I mean...
With other apps, how do you mimic the Marvin?
Well, that's not possible. No, I'm pretty sure she meant just there's the apps here, and that's the workflow library, where you have your workflow sort of pre-made, and then you go to the apps, and then you see the apps that we have so far. It is actually really fun to do those, I have to tell you. It's just, it's really fun. So yeah, here's the things. Obviously they don't have these ugly colors here. So let's get rid of that. Um, yeah, yeah, that looks a bit like things. Um, okay, so yeah, I think obviously there's so much. I'm sorry that it took more than an hour, but I have time if you want to stick around, if you have questions. We're not going to close this down.
Why is it called Marvin?
Oh yeah, that's a popular question. I did answer this in a webinar a year ago, and so here's the birth story. As I told you, I needed this for myself, and I just kind of used this as the app that does all the stuff that I want apps to do for me. So I said, I want to track my feelings, how I feel every day, and have a diary. So I added that in. And I was like, I feel really overwhelmed sometimes and stressed. I should remember to do my breathing exercises. I want an app that reminds me and does the breathing exercise for me. So Marvin was just kind of like, my life coach in a way. It had all these things built specifically for me. And then that's kind of the first vision that I had for Marvin. I wanted this app that just is really smart. It's like an AI basically that communicates with you, that observes what you do. So you can tell it, here are my life goals. I care about my health this much. I want to achieve this. I want to lose weight or get fit or whatever it is. And the app knows what you want, and it observes also how much action you take on what, right? So it kind of starts to give you more specific advice to you. So it maybe knows I'm a perfectionist, and then it knows, oh, she hasn't worked on this project in a while, and I know she tends to procrastinate these, and then Marvin would pop up, or the AI, and talk to me and say, hey, so I've noticed this, and then ask a question. So it's literally like a life coach built in. This was obviously a super ambitious and kind of crazy idea that I thought I could just sort of do this by myself. It's still something we're going towards, but it's going to take much longer than I originally anticipated. Again, classic case of, feeling like you can do way more than you can actually do. And obviously, I needed a mascot. I wanted a mascot for it because the whole app was the kind of like the selling point for that app, and what made it unique was going to be this life coaching aspect, this communication of, something talks to you and you click answers, and then it answers back and it communicates with you. And I wanted that to be not just a faceless app, so I had to create a mascot, a character. And I just kind of wanted something cute, really lovable, and something that felt a bit like your friend. And so I drew Marvin, and then I just looked at him and I had to give him a name, and I don't know, I just thought that's a Marvin, and the Marvin name came about, but obviously Marvin.com is taken. I think there's even an app actually called Marvin. It does something completely different. So I needed an adjective to make it a bit more unique. And Amazing Marvin just kind of reminded me of a superhero, because I guess that's what, the app would have had to be if it can actually do all that. So Amazing Marvin just kind of sounded nice, and that's how the name came about. And that's why Marvin is still our mascot. He doesn't talk to you yet. That's something I'm continuously working on, because at some point the Marvin story is kind of crazy, but I really pushed on, and I have written a lot of these conversations, but Mark was like, this is ridiculous. You're never going to ever finish this. We're never going to launch. So we just had to really think, we already have something unique. We already have something that's probably helpful to people. Let's just put that out. Forget about that conversation tree. We can do that later. Let's just make a good productivity app, start with the basics, build from there. And so that's where we are now. I can't tell when, but at some point there will be strategies where it will be Marvin talking to you based on the things that you do, coaching you. It will be optional, as always, just a strategy you can turn on or not. But for now, Marvin is just, he's kind of the soul, I guess, of the app. He's the mascot, and here he is.
Okay. Question. If you have sort of a fitness goal project, and then you want to do recurring things, it's like sort of how do you set up habits in Marvin?
Yeah, that's...
Like, is it tasks with subtasks, or is it a recurring project, or what?
Well, those are two things that I heard in there. Habits and goals that I want to do pretty soon, because those are things I also want for myself in Marvin. And habit tracking apps are usually kind of a whole different breed of app. So right now I would say that Marvin is definitely a to-do list app, and there's different types of productivity apps to manage your tasks. It goes a little bit into project management, because we do have the projects, and we're going to develop more in that area as well. But in habits, it's usually a whole different app category. Because usually what people want with habits is some kind of threshold, like saying I want to do something, about 3 times a week, but maybe not on a specific day. So if you want to do it on a specific day, you can just use recurring items for now. And there's in the workflow library a snippet for that. So if you search for habit, there's this separate habits, right? Okay. And with that, you can tag certain recurring tasks that are really more like a habit, because I do think it makes sense to sometimes separate the habits from the tasks, because you always try to be mindful of not creating lists that are too long, because that's just going to create overwhelm. Overwhelm is going to trigger procrastination. That's kind of another key principle. So this strategy will allow you to tag certain things with a habit. So let's say my supplements maybe is a good habit. I can just add the habit tag. And then it will actually, as you can see, it doesn't show that here now. Well, actually, wait, it does. Oh, I probably didn't do this right. Oh yeah, I didn't do this right. It didn't save it. Whew. You have to actually update this. So now you can see it has the habit label. And now it's not here anymore in your day, but instead it's in the habits. So now it just pops up here. And that's a way that you can manage habits. So you can tag them with the habit tag, turn on the snippet called separate habits, and it will separate them out from your task list. Oops. So you can kind of keep tasks and habits separate. But again, I think a good habit tracker would have also, other types of habits where you can track how often you do something. It gives you streaks. It gives you, sort of an idea of how you're doing, if you're sticking more or less, some feedback there. And that we do have that planned. I'm really excited about that. And we also have goals planned, because goals, like what are goals? Goals are basically things that we want to accomplish or things we want to improve on. And to do that, we need to take certain types of actions. And so that will be sort of like an overarching thing where you can set up a goal and say, in order for this goal, these habits are related to it. These maybe single action steps are related to it, or these projects. And Marvin will be able to evaluate how well you're doing towards that goal based on how much you're actually spending, doing these things that are related to that goal. So that's something we have planned.
You ready for another question?
But yeah, goals right now, I think the best way to do it right now. No, it's okay. You can stay here. I'm almost done.
Okay.
Maybe you could set it up as a project, or if it's an ongoing thing, like you say, I want to be, healthy, and that's a life goal. But you can also set this up as a subcategory here. So that would be, I think, the best way to do this for now. Yeah.
So how can you integrate with Notion?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. So yeah, Notion, I think people use Notion as a different way, but I think what Notion wants to be, or is really great at, is sort of as a reference tool. So there's different ideas. So if you want to mainly spend your time in Notion, one of our users has come up with this amazing thing. I didn't even know it's possible, but you can embed Marvin in your Notion. So if you prefer to be in Notion to work, you can, depending on how you're using it, you can embed the Marvin app in there. So you can have all the Marvin, functionality, just like a little window. So that's one way if you want to be Notion. But if you need Notion stuff in Marvin, I would assume that the most likely use case is that you maybe have some notes that you want to link to. So like, let's say you have a project, but you have the information about that project in Notion. So we do have a note thing here, but it doesn't include images yet, but we have a lot of work to do with the notes.
You should have a notebook?
No,
Okay.
Just normal notes for projects and tasks and categories. But you could just like link to that reference in Notion. There's no deep integration yet. Integration is a big area where we have a lot of work to do. And again, I'm not an expert at all the other apps. So if there's something where you said, oh, this would be great if I could do this kind of integration with this app, just reach out, let us know. We have a product board where you can always submit ideas. And just tell you, this is really important to me, this is a little bit important to me, and just let us know what you need. And when a lot of people say the same thing, we give that more priority. So we're very open to all these things and integrations. But yeah, right now there's no deep integration. You would just have to add some kind of link to Notion in the notes. So yes. What else?
Okay. Here's a question. I'm using the separate habits workflow, but the task count shows up for today list and the habits smart list. Is there a way to remove the today count from the habit?
Yes. So are you sure that it's not just the same? But basically this sidebar here, right, that's kind of like what most people start with when they customize. If you hover over it, there's this edit sidebar thing. And then it gives you full control over the sidebar. So you can add a Marvin logo. You can add a calendar. And here you can see those tabs. So the habit tab is just the workflow just created this for you. But you could have also set this up manually, right? You can delete things, you can unhide things because sometimes you maybe want to keep them, but just clean up for now. And when you click here on actually connecting which smart list this maps to, you can say show count in sidebar and you can unclick this. So again, this is customizing where it maps to, which smart list it maps to, and you can say if it has a count. Here you can pick the color and the icon. Here you can pick the name that shows up, and then you can just exit and it will have adjusted this. So now it's my habits and there's no more count. And this is also interesting for performance. If you have a ton of tasks, a ton of smart lists, this is obviously something that takes a lot of computer power to calculate always these numbers. So if you feel like, hey, I don't care about this, I just want it to be as fast as possible, definitely remove the counts. And also make sure this is unchecked, show counts for the items. This actually relates to these built-in things we have here where you could see all of your labels, but in the things, this is hidden. But basically this stuff, if it shows counts here or not. So yeah, this is an important thing. I mean, this is sort of like, if you want to go to the strategies, there's this group that we call navigation and lists. Obviously the smart lists is how you define exactly what kind of lists you have. Based on what you need for planning or directly working from. If you like to batch process, you might want to have a call list, for example, email list. And then how you get to these lists, you can use custom squares, bottom menu at the top. Those are more just a bit like preference, and some people like to maybe also have two menus. And then you can always configure all the tabs that map to different lists or map to different screens in Marvin. So you could have, a top menu here where it maps to your master list and your today or your planning view, your calendar. But here you actually have the smart lists that map to specific task lists that you want to get done. So that's just kind of this list stuff. I guess there's a few things, like to come up a lot, like archive and stats, like if you want to be able to see what you've gotten done when. If you use time tracking, you can see how long you've worked on different things. There's sort of this neat little view where you can see how many tasks you've done each day of the week, or your months. And this helps with sort of gauging, like, are we going through maybe a bit of a productivity low? Are we increasing in our productivity? What's going on? And you want to load all of your tasks for this, because we have some performance things where we don't load all the tasks, just speed up the interface. But for stat stuff, you obviously want to have all of them. So you can just click this and it will load all of them, and it tells you now you're in archive mode, where it just shows you all the tasks. And you just click out of it again, and it only it doesn't load all of the completed tasks, only the ones in open projects, basically. Yeah. Are there any more questions? Or anything I can showcase?
You've built an amazing app. Literally solves everything I didn't like about a lot of other task apps. I look forward to all future upgrades.
Yay! Thank you. That's really great to hear. Because a lot of sweat and blood and tears.
One question from the very beginning that we didn't get to was,
Oh,
I don't want to think during the week. How do I prioritize ahead of time? And did you cover? I guess you covered that, right?
well, not specifically, but yeah, that's a really good observation. This idea of I don't want to think at certain times, because we really have to think about the planning process. It's very resource intensive. It takes a lot of mental resources, and that's kind of the key benefit, right, of the day plan. When you create it, you only have to think about what to prioritize when you plan it. But then, when it's time to get stuff done, when you're in action mode, you don't have to really think. And so this is basically the key advantage of the to-do list. But a very similar thing is what if you want to just have a week list, right? It's just a slight variation on the same idea of why this brings so many benefits. This pre-planning, the separating of planning and doing. You have a time where you plan and you get into that mind space, what's the best thing to do? And then you get into doing mode and you just knock stuff off. So I would use the planning ahead strategy. Plan your week here. Then perhaps make a combined smart list. And we have some in this workflow where it automatically pulls those things you explicitly planned and things that have a deadline within that week, right? Because you don't want to have to move those into the planning either. You make a smart list where it combines it, and if you turn on this week list snippet, it will actually give you both of those. It just hid them now because I turned on the to-do list thing, but you can just unhide them here. And this is the difference basically between this week, where it's just what you explicitly planned, and this week all, where it combines. You can see things that are due tomorrow, due in 3 days, overdue. And then you can basically work directly off this list. If you say, well, I don't want to see my projects, like this, I just want action steps, you can then go find the smart list that is used here and that just the strategy is set up, and modify it and say, well, actually, I don't want to see tasks and projects, I only want to see the tasks. So you will sort of pop open these projects and make the tasks, and you can change here anything you want to adjust it. I didn't save this, by the way, that's why they still have projects. And you could go and just, for this one of my favorite strategies, because it's crazy, but it makes such a big difference. Like, let's say this is my day and I look at it, inevitably I'm going to look at more than just one thing, and I can only do one thing at a time, and I'm just going to think about, this or this, this, and I just already get triggered with overwhelm, perhaps. I mean, maybe it's just me, but the focus mode is there's just one thing to look at. It's so simple, but it makes such a big difference, and you just work through it, check it off. You can pause this if you're time tracking. It tracks your time automatically, then you can pause it. You can just sort of at least only see one thing at a time. And if maybe you're stuck here, it's like, I really don't want to do this right now. You can use the arrow keys to just go forward and backward and work on this. So yeah, those are strategy type, what we call work modes. And work modes are basically different modes to get work done. Super focused mode, beat the clock. It's a bit, like a gamified. So yeah, lots to explore. Don't get overwhelmed. You don't have to get into everything right away. Step by step. It's just kind of a fun thing because as we release new thing, there's always something more, always something new, but it shouldn't distract from getting work done, because I think there's certain amount of setups you can do, but I hope it won't cause you to endlessly fiddle, because there's not that much customization. Like, for example, in a Notion, there's clearly way more of a flexible app, Notion, right? But it's always on the scale of flexibility and specificity, and you want something that's specific enough but also flexible enough. And if it's too far in each direction, it can cause issues depending on what you're trying to achieve with it. We hope the workflow library makes it easier. If you just, especially people with ADHD, they often feel like it's easier for them to get work done when it feels more stimulating and new. So sometimes just switching things up and just saying, this week I'm just going to work with this, can be really helpful. Just keep things fresh. I have many different workflows that I kind of know I like. and work for me. And I don't do them, every day. Today is like, okay, I have so much stuff. It's weighing on me, little things. Today is a day planning day. I need to just make a day plan and go through it. But yeah, sometimes I use another workflow. That's kind of the flexibility you get as you get good with this, and you get more experience about what a workflow is and the types of workflows there are. And I do want to put out a lot more resources to help with that whole process of how can you figure out if you're this, a day planning type or a week planning type. How can you know if something's working for you, or you're just not using it right, or it's just not working for you, period. How can you know, and how can you adjust, and all sorts of those types of things. We'll have more help with that for sure. I see you guys are talking about some fun stuff. I always feel like left out when you're doing the webinars. Like the chat is where it's at, and I'm just here like
It's a party in the chat.
talking. I know I'm like not part of it, but maybe I have to change how I do webinars and just not talk so much. Oh well. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a Marvin for Dummies? Start here at square one. Kind of like turn the key in the ignition for your car. I truly never have done any app in this type and feel quite overwhelmed. But know it would be good for me to do something of this nature. I just don't know where to start.
Yeah. The start thing is to ignore all the workflows, all the strategies, and start with what's there. So let's bomb all the setup with the delete workflow. Boom. Let's get back to basics. We just got, again, my day and master list. The theme has changed, but just ignore that. Yeah, the first thing is just setting up the master list. There's a video in the help center in an article. That's always just the first step. Just get the stuff that you have to do out, because there's a reason probably why you want to use a productivity app, right? Or maybe why you've written to-do lists before. So that's just the first step. And then you just want to start with the basic day planning workflow. There's also a help center article about that specifically. It's called Basic Day Planning Workflow. And that's just when you do nothing, like ignore all this, ignore everything. Just, I have to quickly change it because that's not actually how fully what you see when you start. Excuse me. Yeah, you go to plan day and you're just making a daily to-do list. Just what you want to do today, right? You can also, if even simpler, it depends on how much you have to do. You can also just directly type this in here if you want, and just kind of do that. And yeah, just make a list. Keep it on the shorter side, because it always feels amazing when you can get through everything on the list, but it feels not so good if you can't get through it all, and you can always add more. You can maybe say, I'm going to just do 5 things every day. And you plan 5 action steps, 5 specific things you can do that take you at max, an hour, ideally less. And then just try to get through it in that day. And the thing with apps like to-do apps, I think it's something you need to use daily, or at least on the days you work. Like, it doesn't work when you just enter it. And then I see that a lot of people say, oh, I never check it, I never use it. I mean, that's the one habit where you kind of have to take responsibility, and that's something that you have to be aware that that's something you have to do. You have to make this part of your sort of your day. And when you sit down to get work done, or you wake up and you say, I'm ready for my day, the first thing you do is look at your list, right? That's from now on where you know what there is to do. And that, if you've never had that before, it can maybe easy to forget, but that's really the key habit that you need to have to make a to-do app work, because Marvin is not going to do the tasks for you, and it's not going to help you if you don't use it, if you don't look at it. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. They just add it and somehow hopes it will make them more productive, but you have to have this habit of actually checking it every day, getting the habit of adding things to it when things come up, and having a system of how you're going to use it. And this is just the basic system, a day plan. I mean, honestly, there's already more of a system than a lot of people have who use to-do apps. I think for some people, it's just lists that they look at. But I think I've met a lot of people who don't have a strategy of how to go about getting those lists done. And that's the first kind of step. So I hope that helped. That's just the most basic way to start.
Okay, question about batching.
Yeah.
Do you ever organize tasks days by the type of work, creative versus tech versus paperwork, to keep from context switching all day? How would you do that in Marvin with labels?
Yeah. So now here's the cool thing about batching. So batching just means, for everybody who doesn't know, is doing similar things together. So let's say you want to do all of your phone calls together, or maybe you're a video creator and a writer, you do your writing together, you do your video creation together. There's different ways to batch by different attributes. But if you have specific verbs, often you can actually batch by just using that verb. And that's another sort of key best practice. Start with a specific verb, because then you could make a smart list, for example. You can now, of course, I blew up everything is turned off. In the smart list, you can also search for words in the title. That makes it quite easy to batch just by that, if you actually stick to good practices and use the right words. So there's no need for labeling, because in this case, because you try to reduce overhead. You don't want to have a system that's really hard to maintain, where you always have to add these tests, these, and I think that can be an easy thing to overdo with labeling, that you just add labels you don't need. For example, in GTD, you use context labels sometimes, but if you mostly work from home, I wouldn't even really worry about it. Or if you always know, well, these kinds of tags are always done there, so you could use that. And if you want, sometimes it's also maybe based already on the category. So let's say you have maybe different subcategories that are very specific, like writing or blog writing, but you use it for different categories. You could batch just by having the same subcategory name. And then the most flexible way is, of course, the labels, where you can just label projects and tasks with anything. And labels is another and then you just create smart lists from it. Sorry, I'm rambling.
You ready for the next?
Yeah.
Okay, this is maybe a stupid question. When I can't finish a task for today, should I duplicate the task and put it in for tomorrow? Like this, I could check the task for today since I've worked on it. So it gives me a good feeling, although maybe I've planned the time wrong, that I'll need to finish it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So personally, I like to move it along because I use time tracking. So I already know if I worked on that, I have a log of that I worked on that day. So this is time tracking. I can see it that I worked on this task on that day. You can see this when you go into here. It will tell you sort of a table of when you worked on it and the day. So I don't mind it, and I just sort of really feel like I only like checking things off when they're actually done. It's just sort of, otherwise I feel like, this is wrong, it's not done, I can't check this off. But hey, if that's what you like to do, and it feels good to you, because you like checking it off and you don't want to do the time tracking, I think it's a good idea. So you just duplicate it, you just duplicate it, check one off, and then you have to reschedule that one. So it's a lot of steps, and it kind of messes up the procrastination count. But don't worry about it. I think it's a good solution. There's things, it always kind of depends on what things are important to you, like the archive, or maybe you will never look at what you did on one day. Like, you have to think about that as well. Maybe, why does it matter that you have a record of that's what you did that day? Are you actually going to do something with that data later on? Or is that, maybe just something interesting, and I think that's justified enough then. But I think those are both good solutions. By default, when something is left behind, and you've probably seen this if you've gotten into Marvin, because obviously we have a different list for every day, which is also kind of, I guess you don't find that a lot. So it's an actual list that you can go to at any time, and it just shows you what that day is about. And anything that's left behind will sort of collect in this little reschedule dialog. So you can see what's left behind, and you can click it and schedule it for another day, or, I actually did this, completed, and stuff like that. So you don't have to worry that stuff gets left behind, basically. I think Mark has to actually leave very soon. Oh, sorry. And he has to eat. But yeah, I think we can do another session next week or in a couple of weeks, because if you get into it, there's probably more questions. So collect those questions if you want to join another live sort of Q&A session, or just email me and you can tell me, hey, you have to answer this, but you can cover this in the webinar or whatever. And yeah, then we can do this again if there's any remaining questions. But I hope this was really helpful to anybody who's really new to Marvin. I answered your questions. If I skipped anything, if I didn't get to something, yeah, just reach out. Yeah, it's info overload for sure. Ooh, that's an interesting point, Tanya. Yeah, like make it good for reference material. Yeah, that's something I think a lot about. If that's something, a direction we want to go, it opens up a whole other can of worms. Because if you want to be a good note app or reference app, there's a lot of other things you need, other features, and it could create a lot of extra complexity and just where we can't actually do, anything really well. That's also something I'm worried about. But I totally see a lot of, this would just be so great if that would be integrated as well. It would make things a lot easier, smoother. It'd be amazing. So yeah, definitely something I'm thinking about. Yeah, thanks for everybody who joined and who sent in questions. I guess this is really enough. I mean, there's just so much stuff, like how to, shortcuts. I would encourage you to, if you're really sort of a power user, you like efficiency, check out the shortcuts on how to do things. We really try to think of a lot of things. So if sometimes it's not immediately obvious how if something works or if we have something, but for most basic things, because we have now been in sort of beta with just really a few early users and almost 1,000 for about 2.5 years. We just haven't really gotten into marketing. That's why a lot of people say, I've never heard about Amazing Marvin. Why? It's because I am not really doing anything with marketing, because I always feel like, it's not quite there yet. It's not quite ready. But yeah, we've had a lot of early users, and a lot of sort of basic stuff we have already added because they have come up. But also a lot of basic stuff isn't great yet, like the mobile apps. But those are coming very soon, new ones. So yeah, there's a lot of information, and it was really nice to meet you. I'm sorry I couldn't chat with you. I'll read through the chat now, and I hope you have a great time with Marvin. You have a whole year to explore, and oh my God, in a year we'll have so many more things, exciting things coming up. And yeah, stay in touch, join the community. And thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.